Brandt DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, unmatched durability, and reliable components that make sure your cart is working when you are. Lead the field with DXT grain carts from Brandt. Visit your local Brandt dealer for more information.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome, everybody, to RealAg on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Can you believe it is August? Oh, man, it is August. Where is the summer going? Please, slow the calendar down. Slow it down, everybody. Pump the brakes. We're into the back end of summer. We are only about 4 weeks from all the kids going back to school, which is also kind of staggering. Feels like they just got out of school. But it's been a great week. Very, very busy news week. We're going to get to some of that, of course. We're going to talk about some of the Trump tariffs and some of the trade spat at the back end of the show here today. I got some perspectives at the time of doing the recording of today's show. But it's definitely it's been a bit of a nutty week. I was able to spend the early part of the week in Scottsdale, Arizona. You're like July, Scottsdale. I was at a conference, and it was great. I really did some 4-day conference over last weekend. It was really fantastic. Really enjoyed it, and lots of learning to be done. It's important to, even if you're the most experienced of people in your field. Okay, I don't care if it's agriculture, maybe you work in the energy industry, or I don't care what you're doing. You gotta always be learning new stuff, that continuous learning. And somebody once said to me in an interview, one of the greatest characteristics that somebody can exhibit is the thirst for curiosity. And if you can always stay curious, you're always staying on top and learning, and you're not, your area of expertise doesn't become stale and old. And it's, I think that's always lived with me, that curiosity, always be curious. Hey, now today on the program, we'll talk about some of those Trump trade tariffs. We're also going to hear from Brian Voth of IntelliFARM, talk about the markets and find out what he thinks about some of the movement in these markets and what's going on there. We'll also hear from we're also going to hear from a couple farmers, one in Alberta, one in Saskatchewan, about some of their crop conditions. We'll get to that in a second. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, we would love to hear from you. All you got to do is send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or you can always call that RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Also want to encourage you, while I got your attention, is to subscribe to the Real Agriculture newsletters. You could do that by going to realagriculture.com/subscribe. We got a great suite, a portfolio, you could say, of fantastic newsletters based on your topic of interest. So we've got an Eastern Canadian update, a Western Canadian update. You can figure out, what that all means. We've got a cattle email, a machinery and tech email, mind your farm business. We've got an ag policy email that's starting up and going to be going out. So we have a lot of different things for you to consider and really get your head wrapped around based on your what your area of interest and expertise. I forgot the agronomist email as well, which is really meant for some of the ag retails and professional agronomists out there as well. So please check that out. That is realagriculture.com/subscribe. Okay, earlier this week on the RealAg Radio podcast, I chatted with Jeff Bennett. He farms in Dodsland, Saskatchewan, just outside of Kindersley, and we got an update on how he's making out with his crop conditions.
Well, I can say for the first time in half a decade that they look good.
That is great, because your area has had some punishing times as of late from a Mother Nature perspective. I've been kind of following some of the weather patterns here through the growing season, of course, and you've had some rain this year, which really helps.
Well, I think we're praying to the right gods now, I guess. I don't know, the last few years we'd had, crop insurance was my number one crop for the first 3 out of 4, and then last year was just sort of a a crop that could have been and never was. And then this year, touch wood, we're doing good. We're sitting at about 10 or 12 inches of rain across the farm, and yeah, we had the crop sit there. We got it in good time, and it sat there for 2 weeks because it was a bit cold and a bit hot, and then we got rain, and we haven't had a day over 30 yet. So I don't know. I dare say we're doing well.
That's great to hear from Jeff Bennett of Dodslin, Saskatchewan. You know, Jeff is in that area where he's had some pretty terrible crops. Mother Nature has not cooperated as of, the last number of years in that area. So it is great to see that he's getting supported by Mother Nature here in 2025. And it's always important when you're talking to farmers, everybody, at this time of the year, if they've got some potential out in the field, they don't want to jinx it. We still got to get the combines out there. We got to get it into the bin. We're going to feel a lot more confident when we get it into the bin. One of the things that Jeff and I also chatted about was because of that 2021 drought that happened and some of the people pre-booking some of the, doing the pre-sales with on the grain production contracts, the real hesitation to do much aggressive marketing, that is definitely something that has hung over since 2021. Now, let's hear about the crop conditions with another farmer, this time out of Alberta, foremost Alberta, and I chatted with Shaun Harty. Here's what he had to say about his crop conditions.
Oh, it's the tale of two cities down here, I'll tell you. It's been a crazy year, which I'm sure you've been told before.
Yeah, well, did you get any hail?
I didn't, no, but south of us got a pretty good hailstorm, down along the 501 there.
Yeah.
But we got out real nice and early this spring and I was really happy, got the durum in first week April, not all of it, but some of it, and got a good start. And then we had some rains and a little bit of snow and stuff and slowed us down. And it's amazing the stuff we seeded before the stoppage is, 15 to 20 probably it's going to run, and the stuff after might hit 40.
Oh, so later's better.
Way better, yeah. We were so dry in May that that early seeded crop just really took a beating, and it's crazy. At seeding time, I wished I'd had more in when the first storm hit, and now I'm darn glad that we didn't, because we've had probably 3.5 inches of rain here in July, and end of June we got about 1 inch and 8/10, and it's crazy how it just totally changed. The season totally flipped on us.
Now, okay, so there's another important component of this, and on most years, later seeded crops in your area don't do well because we have that extreme July heat, right? And so we try to get ahead of that. We have not had that heat this year.
No, not at all. It's quite the opposite, really. Like June and July seem like they've flipped roles, right? Like it just really is opposite. This is usually what our June is like with this kind of moisture and weather pattern, right? And yeah, you're right. That's why I wanted it in early, especially the durum on lentil stubble. I thought, get a good start on it, get a good jump on it, and it seeded beautiful and came up nice. And early on was our nicest crop by a mile, and then now this, in 1st of August coming up on here, it is crazy how the rains hit these crops. It really is.
That was Shaun Harty of Foremost Alberta. We've got more coming up here on RealAg on the weekend. Up next, we're talking markets with Brian Voth of IntelliFARM right after this.
Your Co-op Grow team are your local experts because we live here too. As your crops fill and mature, we're here to help you assess crop health, manage pre-harvest applications, and make informed decisions for a successful harvest. Co-op, we're all growing together. Here for your farm, here for your family.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters, and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Mazix Seeds and Lalamon Plant Care.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Dive into the markets now and find out where we go from here. And of course, August 1st in Western Canada is the flip to what we would say the new crop marketing year. In the U.S., I believe it's September 1st. So it is a little bit different for corn and soybeans in comparison to spring wheat and canola in Western Canada. But we're in new crop territory now. Now we're talking 25, 26. And harvest is fast approaching. And like I mentioned earlier, I think for a lot of Western Canadian farmers, especially if you're in the dry parts of Saskatchewan and Alberta, you're a little bit hesitant to get aggressive on some of those grain production contracts. I will mention, though, there are other options, so to speak, where you can use forward future contracts, options to try to hedge some of your risk and get, lock in some of the prices, but they're a little bit less utilized in the marketplace. That's always something we're trying to work on and strive to increase the amount of use of them. But grain production contracts are definitely the majority of what is used to price, where you sign a contract with a grain company, and people are hesitant to do in some of these parts because of what happened in 2021. So let's get right now to what Brian Voth of IntelliFARM has to say. He was a guest on the RealAg Radio podcast on Wednesday. He chatted with guest host Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture. Let's hear what they had to say.
I was hoping for something super exciting to tackle today, but you work in the markets. How would you describe commodity markets these days?
Really, really dull. And it's been a bit of an abnormal, last 4 or 5 months, because seasonally we would get a rally, into the first part of the year, January, February, then back off, and then get another rally, usually into spring, summer, based on, seeding conditions, acreage reports, things like that, and then potential weather scares into summer. And then usually by July, end of June, something like that, we back off again until harvest. Well, we haven't done anything. We had the February rally, and aside from canola, which is maybe the one exciting topic to talk about, I guess, aside from canola, everything else has literally just slid lower since February. A few rallies here and there, but really not much has happened at all. And so that's why it's been so dull, because there just hasn't really been any good marketing opportunities since February. Mm-hmm. Canola aside.
Okay. So, and we will talk about canola in a moment, but now there's sometimes boring can be good, because sometimes boring means, hey, volatility means I'm not going to lose money, etc. But sometimes boring also means we're stuck with not great prices. So where are we at relative to where maybe some producers would like to be?
Well, from where producers would like to be, we're a long ways away, because the answer is always more and
higher,
which is really not a good answer, because it's rather subjective too. But no, to me, I actually think we are bouncing off of the bottom right now. We're actually back to basically the same levels as last August, when we bottomed out and then started to move up. And if you go back, it's funny you mentioned that dull can be okay, because the alternative can be a little bit wild. And if you go, 2021 or 2020, 21, 22 was the polar opposite. And, and I remember telling some people, I'm ready for some precedented times again after that whole stretch.
Yes.
Well, now it's like, this is really dull, and we could have a little bit of excitement, but maybe not quite to quite to that extreme again. So, but even back in 2022, 23, I remember having conversations with Shaun and him asking where I thought things were going. These levels that we have right now, this is where I said we were going from 2 years ago already. And so when you look at the long-term cycles of markets, this isn't actually unusual that after a big price spike and a drop, you go sideways, and it could be for 3, 4, 5 years in a row.
Right.
And that is, so far at least, since we bottomed out last fall, that is exactly what we've done. And so in that sense, not really unexpected, but it doesn't make it any more interesting or exciting. It's just, we're now going sideways in a new range from where we were sideways between 2014 to 2020.
Right. Now, what I find interesting about at least some of this is that, at least commodity markets wise, kind of dull. But like when we look at all the political wrangling, trade deals, trade agreements, back of the napkin stuff, all the volatility between Canada and the US, et cetera, and yet we have this dullness in the commodity markets. Do you have thoughts on that? Why do you think that is?
I would say the biggest thing comes down to that there's ample supply of grains around the world right now. And so there isn't this underlying concern like there was in 2020, 21 when the supply side got squeezed. Now it comes down more to demand. And that's what you're seeing, especially with the political stuff. You're seeing these demand trends shift. So, the historical patterns of typically China would be buying a lot of U.S. soybeans for October, November delivery. So like harvest delivery out of the U.S. Well, that has been almost non-existent, but they have really ramped up purchases from Brazil. So these trade flows are being altered at this point anyways. And yeah, I think the bulk of that is because of this whole uncertainty. And I mean, it all kind of centers around one country, or one person in a country, I should say, I guess. And just the uncertainty as to what's going to happen going forward. And unfortunately, everybody else gets dragged into this dilemma then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let us then talk about the one perhaps more interesting part of the commodity complex, canola. Where are we at as far as pricing, and where are we at as far as you said, the supply and demand shifts? Why is canola perhaps more interesting than some of the other commodities?
So canola is the one that is not in the excess supply situation. And interestingly enough, like Stats Canada finally did update production numbers and whatnot from the last 3 years to account for the fact that based on the numbers that they were using, we would have this massive negative carryout, which is obviously mathematically impossible. And so production clearly had been understated for the last few years. And so they have to start going back and making these adjustments so that the math actually works. But demand has been phenomenal. We ship the bulk of our canola oil south to the U.S. That does tie us into this whole trade issue because of all of the uncertainty around the biofuel policies and what was going to happen with canola oil coming from Canada. It does look like that's going to pass and it'll be fine and we'll be able to keep shipping stuff there. Then you drag in China and their tariffs. And this one is a really interesting one. When this all happened back in February, March, it seemed like everybody read this, they're putting tariffs on canola oil and canola meal, but everybody kind of read this as we're putting tariffs on canola.
Right. Not the same thing.
Raw canola seed was not included in this. And so then when you break it down, like China's a big buyer of canola meal, but they buy almost no oil. And so, it's like, well, they're not going to tariff the raw seed. Plus, when you look at their crush capacity that they have in China, it makes more sense for them to buy raw seed, ship it there, because A, it's easy, and B, they have their crush capacity. So, there was a lot of people that panicked, obviously, when canola dropped, and canola did drop on this news because it's a headline thing. Yeah. And, we kind of sat back and said, well, this doesn't make any sense when you look at the fundamental side and you look at the actual announcement, not just the assumption of, they're going to put tariffs on canola.
We'll be back with more of RealAg on the weekend right after this quick break.
FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Join thousands of Canadian growers who trust FP Genetics to deliver innovative, reliable hybrid fall rye seed season after season. Experience the next wave by visiting fpgenetics.ca.
RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada. We're listening to Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture's conversation with Brian Voth of IntelliFARM. You know, Brian was talking about how, you know, when China announced those tariffs on canola, the market really spiked to the bottom and then progressed to move past quite quickly past where it initially had been before the tariff announcement, as we saw lots of price appreciation. Let's continue the conversation with Brian Voth of IntelliFARM.
Maybe they will at some point, but as of then and now, that's not the case. And so that is, I think there was a lot of canola that got dumped, you know, at the $13, $14 level in Feb, March, early April. And then we proceeded to rally to, you know, $17 again. Mm-hmm. But it does highlight just how tight the canola market is. And that is not going to change. You know, with our increased crush capacity here, exports are going to have to get rationed this coming year again. And anyone that has a crush plant is also an exporter. So they're going to prioritize crushing over exports because their crush plants can only do one thing. And so the exports are going to have to get rationed to an extent. So even if China were to say we're going to put a tariff onto canola, well, there wouldn't have been as much for them to buy anyways. Plus, I always go back to the situation that if China says they're putting tariffs onto something, they had no intention of buying it anyways. So it was going to happen regardless.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to see, you know, exactly that. You read a headline and you think, oh, this is like super bad. And don't get me wrong. Yes, a tariff on all canola would be awful. But when you read the details, that's just it. When we talk about global markets and we talk about trade, like each component of canola, so there is seed, there is oil, there is meal, they are each their own thing that is traded. And so the details really do matter here. And exactly that. I think it is incredibly important to recognize sort of the posturing and the political side of what gets tariffed and what doesn't. And especially with China, like we've seen that with the U.S. as well. China likes to make these announcements based on stuff they didn't need it anymore, and then it becomes, you know, a bargaining chip that really isn't something to be bargained, right? So I don't know who's learning from who on this one, but there we go.
I've always said too, like China is very good at getting what they want on their own terms because they do have so much pull on the markets because of their demand side. You know, as a Mennonite, I've also joked that I think China is probably the best Mennonites out there because we could all learn a lesson from them on how to get a deal. But that aside.
But do they have coupons, Brian? They need coupons.
Well, maybe we could introduce that to them. I don't know.
We should. Okay, yeah.
Canola coupons.
Anyone not from Southern Manitoba will not get that joke. But it's really important to have a coupon. Anyway,
exactly.
It is true. They're master manipulators at getting a really good deal. And I mean, and realistically, the economy the size that it is, that they can do that, right? It is. Now, I guess that brings us to, though, that second part of that discussion is looking ahead. And I'm not saying China's not about to be important because it always will be, or at least for the foreseeable future. But the discussion is that maybe it's not as strong an economy as it was. How does that shift things for Canadian commodities, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's always hard to try and put an actual analysis onto that because you start talking what if scenarios. And what if they stop buying? Well, then everybody's going to be in trouble. Because again, you look at their demand numbers, and without them, and obviously they can't just not buy anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Because then people start starving, and then starving people in a country like that become very, very powerful. And so it's not like they would just exit the market completely. But what we are seeing again is these shifts. And, there are a few commodities, so canola being one of them, where they can't go buy canola in the amounts from anyone else that they can from Canada. Could they get some from Australia? Yes. But again, when you look at Australia having like a 6 million ton crop instead of 19 or 20, while their export capacity is just very limited. Same with the EU. Could they buy some from there? Yeah, probably. Ukraine, that sort of thing. But it's kind of like buying soybeans out of South America. Like it can be inconsistent, and the consistency is out of Canada.
Right.
Now again, if they do put tariffs on, then to me, I look at it and say, well, they weren't going to buy it anyways. And if the price drops far enough, they'll buy it because, again, they recognize what a good price on the buying side is. So this really has been one to, for farmers to not let the emotional side get dragged into the decision making, not get caught up in these headlines and reading, everything that's going on Twitter and whatever else, and making decisions based on numbers and based on profitability. And that is going to get a lot tougher to do, given how a lot of areas look in Canada this year, because we're not, aside from canola, we're not a big enough driver on grain prices like the U.S. would be, or Russia, where if they have a crop disaster, it will drive the world markets. We'll have some impact, but not that much. And so that's where, in a 2012 year where there was the massive drought in the U.S., we kind of got the best of both worlds because we didn't have the drought and we can tag along on the coattails on the pricing side. Mm-hmm. The really double whammy is when we have a crop issue and the U.S. doesn't.
Yeah. Which maybe is a little bit what's happening this year. We'll see.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Not nearly to that extreme. I will note, because my friends here in Ontario would be very angry with me if I didn't say 2012 did hit Ontario. But Ontario, when we talk about crops, is a blip when we compare it to the U.S. and Western Canada. So, yes, you are all unique and beautiful butterflies and really matter. But corn, soybeans, wheat in Ontario is a blip when we compare it to the U.S. and the West. But I'll just note 2012, apparently. I didn't live here at the time, but it was very, very dry here. It was the last real drought for here.
Well, and again, when you look at how far Ontario extends south, that makes sense because until I lived there, I kind of just assumed that Ontario was straight east of me here. Yes. Which it is. Yes. Part of it.
East of you is what Ontario calls north. Yeah. And I tried to explain that to them, but they don't understand. It's like I have two heads. Anyway, okay. Brian Voth, IntelliFARM.ca. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That was Brian Voth of IntelliFARM. Highly encourage you to check out, every Wednesday we drop a new episode of RealAg Markets where we talk to a market analyst about what's happening out there. What are some of the, what are the opportunities? What are the barriers to success in your crop marketing? And we're entering that, Brian described it as kind of dull right now, lack of action. I think it's fairly accurate. And yeah, I guess what's overhanging the market is some of the supply, and especially as it applies to the U.S. corn crop. There's a very strong crop in the U.S. Now, there has been a lot of rain as of late, and people are starting to ask a little bit like, hey, has there been too much rain in the Midwest? You may have also heard about this thing called tassel wrap, which is another potential challenge on some of the pollination. So those are, we're going to see, because we got the Pro Farmer Crop Tour here at the back end of August. I'm actually going to be on the western leg this year for a couple days to really see some of that U.S. corn crop for myself. Looking forward to that indeed. But new crop year. Pay attention to your crop marketing, everybody. Okay, when we come back, I'm going to share some thoughts. I've got some early results of our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for July, and we're also going to talk about Trump trade and some of the tariffs that Canada faces. You're listening to RealAg on the Weekend, hosted by Shaun Haney, and we'll be back right after this quick break.
Crush it with Maizex canola. Maizex Seeds is 100% focused on Canadian farmers. Your source for high-performance grain, silage, and grazing corn, as well as soybeans and, new for 2026, canola. Visit Maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
I'm Lindsay Smith, host of The Agronomist, and I want to thank you
for tuning in for over 200 episodes of our beloved little program. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for our live and interactive agronomy Q&A. Each week, our guest panel will handle some of your toughest agronomic questions live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, X, and RealAgriculture.com. Tune in Monday nights or go to RealAgriculture.com/agronomist and sign up for our email notifications and don't miss an episode.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
You know, one of the big concerns here in 2025 is farm profitability. And now, there are some differences, okay? So how somebody feels if they've got a cow-calf operation, like if you take that Longview Highway up from Highway 3, you're working your way to through Longview and Turner Valley. There's some beautiful ranching here. I did that drive on Thursday this week. If you've never been on the Longview Highway, I highly encourage you to do so. It is the most picturesque, like, to own a ranch on that road, like, just spectacular. There's a reason why they shoot movies out there. There's a reason why they do. A little bit of a squirrel moment there. I apologize. Okay. So if you're in the ranching business, you're feeling a lot better about yourself. You know, the cattle business, I was talking to a feed yard on Friday morning, and we were chatting about the fact that, hey, you know, it's been pretty good. Now, on the cropping side, a lot more concerns. There's concerns about the price of fertilizer here in 2025 for the growing season. You know, the commodity markets we just heard about from Brian Voth. Profitability is, well, I'll describe it as elusive for even the greatest of farm managers. Now, 2026 is shaping up to be, honestly, not a lot different. A lot of concern out there about, you know, the input prices and what fertilizer is relative to where we are on some of the crop prices. Now, in 21, 22, and 23, it was flipped where fertilizer prices hadn't caught up to where the market had moved to, and farmers enjoyed that positive spread in their favor. Well, now we're kind of stuck in the reverse. And it's been a real challenge, and you really need to stay on top of your farm management. So the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is out, and I'm going to be writing about this next week on RealAgriculture.com. But if you look at current farm financial performance, we're in the mid-60s at a 200. That's pretty flat to where we were in April. Now, this is farmers looking at their current farm financial performance to last year at this time. So we're in worse shape than we were last year at this time. And future farm financial performance is in the low 70s, which is pretty much the same as it was this past April. And kind of, you know, shows that 12 months out, farmers they feel we're going to be even worse off than we are today. So this is kind of the mood. And I think it puts some quantitative numbers to what anecdotally you're probably going to hear as you're barbecuing or camping this weekend with some of, you know, your fellow farmers, or maybe you're listening and you got a brother or a sister that's farming. You got some insight now, and you'll be speaking to them with a little bit more background and education on what's happening on the farm from a profitability standpoint. Now let's talk. So now, truth be told, okay, we got to timestamp this because stuff moves fast. I am recording this show Friday afternoon before the long weekend. Okay? Take that in mind. So if you're listening on Saturday or Sunday and you're like, what? Get up to speed, Haney. I'm just telling you, I'm putting this timestamp on it. So what we see is that it really kind of appears that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. is not in a great spot. And then there's also the Mexico factor. So we've seen the U.S. striking trade deals, trade arrangements, trade frameworks with countries all over the world. So the EU, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, the UK, of course. And Canada and Mexico are having a harder time. And I'm not surprised that they would be left to last, because there's a chance that they are not going to face this blanket 15% tariff like some of the other countries are. Now, Canada's really, it appears, in a little bit of a worse position because we're 35% tariff now, implemented on August 1st of these non-USMCA or CUSMA compliant goods. So Mexico was given an extension of 90 days, but the more you look at it, Canada and Mexico are kind of in the same spot. Nothing has really changed. Now, how the branding of how they're doing is different, but the reality is I think we're kind of both countries in the same position. It's been my thought for quite some time that President Trump says something and Canadians run around with their chicken, like a chicken with their head cut off, on what are we going to do, not totally realizing that, some of this is just negotiating out in the open, and we got to keep grounded. Got to be a little bit more patient. We got to take a deep breath. I was in the U.S. all week. I am really of the belief that some of this is just kind of pomp and circumstance, and really is kind of just, we're going to have a deal. I think that's the best, I guess, to conclude my thought, that we're going to have a deal. I'll even say I think we're going to have one by Sunday night, maybe Monday. I think we're going to have some sort of okay, we've figured that, Canada stepped up and we've done this. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's defense spending. That is one to look at. I'm not exactly sure, but Canada, Mexico are different than the rest of the pool. Okay? And right now, a car coming from Japan that is made in Japan is facing a lower tariff than than a car that's coming out of Ontario. So a U.S. automaker that has a plant in Ontario faces a higher tariff than Toyota coming from Japan. Kind of nonsensical. And it is not going to last for a considerable length of time, in my opinion. Now, has all of this hoopla and negotiating circus and huff and puff, has it impacted and hurt how Canadians feel about the U.S.? I think it has. The lack of Canadians traveling to the U.S., I think Canadians have kind of spoke with their wallet. They've spoken with their feet and their actions. But at the end of the day, business is going to find a way. And when I talk to companies that are operating maybe in, Canada and the US, or maybe even all three countries, they're really running under the assumption that we're going to find some sense of normalcy at some point here. At some point. I'll also throw something in your head. Pay attention. If you think that the UK and the EU and Japan are out of the woods, they've just bought themselves time by agreeing to what the president wanted. They just bought themselves time. It will not surprise me that we have another round, even before the midterms, of some sort of, we've got to renegotiate. So this is the current state of normal. We've just got to get maybe a little more desensitized, or maybe a little bit used to it. Hopefully, for all three economies' sake, there can be some resolution to this, and maybe we can move ahead and start to talk about that USMCA CUSMA renegotiation next July, just under a year from now. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to send me your feedback. My email address is shaney@realagriculture.com. The RealAg feedback line is 855-776-6147. When you're talking to your family and your friends, while you're grilling and smoking some meat here over the weekend, talk about these issues and provide me with some of your feedback. I want to hear from you, okay? So, and also go to RealAgriculture.com. Okay, that's enough. We're out of time, everybody. Have yourselves a great long weekend. Cheers.